Hello, this is Mitsaka, today with a new video format. Today I will show you how to turn this image, which was made by Ichomo from my Discord server, and turn it into this, which is, I personally think, a much nicer and more well-composed scene. So I will go through his scene and take the steps that I would generally take when I improve my artwork, and hopefully show you some of these steps and ideas that I generally have when working on my projects. I actually already finished the final scene that you can see over here, but I want you to understand the main steps I took. So, tip number one is take care of your horizon. The problem here is that the horizon is not large enough. The reason being that your camera distance is too low. If you go into the camera tab and look over here, you can actually see these values clip start and end. So it can only see up to a distance of 655. I generally set this to 10,000 just to be sure, and then you can scale up your ground until it doesn't make any significant difference anymore. You can already see that the perspective of the image is a lot better. Tip number two is regarding these mountains. The problem is that they are too large. You can see that this mountain is much further back but a lot higher. That isn't really how this mountain should work. In general, you want to keep your mountain size like rather like the same or something like that, and then it's nice to have a composition that actually shows that the further back the mountain goes, the smaller it gets. And if you don't want to like build too large of a scene, you can actually fake that. But the very important thing to remember is that it should get smaller towards the end, not bigger. And mountains aren't actually that steep. If you want to get a feel for that, just hop on Google Maps and look at the mountains there. For fjords, this is actually fine because those are pretty steep, but in general, like, keep your mountains a little bit more flat and you will get nicer results. Tip number three, let's actually make these mountains look a bit nicer. So what I generally do with these to avoid these quads that you can see everywhere is to shade them smooth. The next step is to decimate them a bit using the decimate modifier. Where is it? Over here, yeah. And then just like move it up to like 0.7 or something, just something that looks nice, and then add an edge split over here. And then you can like go back here and try out different values and see what looks best. And then immediately you have a nicer mountain. What I then generally do is I use proportional editing to rotate the entire mountain. Right now it is set to randomness, which I don't want. I want the smooth option. And then what I do is I move it a bit like towards this side, and then I rotate it around that side, and you can already see that it's getting sort of a curve into this direction. And if you look into the final scene that I made, you can see that all these mountains are sort of curved around the central point with the hut and the horizon. Tip number four is pretty simple, and that is just water reflections. So what I would advise you to do is to shade this smooth and to simply use, oh god, the material died. Let's create a new one. To use something like this, where you have a bluish material and then set the roughness very low. If you want to control the color of your water a little bit more, you can set the roughness pretty high and add a clear coat. That way it preserves its actual color, but it still renders some reflections on there. Just experiment with the clear coat value and the roughness value to get a nice water material, because reflections are actually the thing that makes water look like water. So even if you have a totally diffuse scene, they can add a lot. Next tip is regarding these clouds. These clouds are way too small and way too close to the camera. If you want to add clouds to your low poly scene, I generally prefer two ways to do that. Either you go with the option that I used here and just put them close to the horizon. These clouds actually just have a standard material with some emission to make them a lot brighter than their environment, because I wanted them to be white. You can also work with volume materials, like with the principled volume shader, etc., to make nice clouds. But in general, make them large, put them somewhere in the background, because that's where they belong, or put them above your scene, like over here. Tip number 6 is one of the most compositional errors that most people make. And that is, place your subjects towards the center of the image. The problem with this image is we have multiple points of interest, right? We have this car, we have the hut, we have this cornfield, we have the sheep, and we have this little boat over here. And the three that are down here on the bottom right are actually way too close to the corner. You can see that the sheep is actually touching the corner, and that should, I don't want to say never, but very rarely be the case in these sort of images. It should only be the case if your subject, for example, is too big to actually fit on the screen. Then you can make it really large and like extend it outside of the image. But then again, most of the time, putting it in the center or like in the like more towards the center will help your composition to be a lot cleaner and a lot more readable. Tip number 7 is also about points of interest. We already talked about these, and the problem in this image is that there's way too much detail outside of the point of interest. For example, this forest is really cluttered with these stripes. You can do that, but there are also a lot of nasty intersections, and there's a lot of contrast because you have a very dark and very bright material, and that generally draws attention to this area, which you don't want because your main subject is the shack, the little hut here, and maybe like the boat or something. That is why I actually replaced the trees in my final scene with something that is much simpler and pushes the attention away from these trees towards the main shack. Tip number 8 is this ground. Same problem as with the mountains, and we will actually use a different, like a very similar solution. So what I generally do to fix grounds like these is I start rotating them a little bit around in proportional editing mode, but it's just to give them some more randomness. And then the next step is to use the decimate modifier, though this time I am going to apply it. I will also shade this smooth so that it has less detail, and then you can actually use the brush modifier to repaint your walkways and paths, etc. Make sure that they like don't have zigzaggy lines, because then again, like, this draws too much attention where we don't want it to be. And then you're going to end up with something that is fine. I mean, honestly, there are better ways to do terrain, but this is a decent way to do it if you are low on time and just want to finish something very quickly. Tip number 9 regards these little like pebbles, rocks, these grass elements, these bushes. You can see that in the original scene they are almost evenly scattered here to sort of fill this area. That is not good. If you want to fill up an area, try to use like larger level detail and try to group these small objects, because this is a very noisy setup. You have all these little points that are sticking out and trying to grab onto your attention, while a much nicer way is to actually use these to guide your attention. So you can see how I place these bushes here to emphasize this path, or to break up the even lines here in the front, and like even here where they don't have a specific purpose, I try to group them together so that they don't grab onto your attention too much. Tip number 10 is another like very old compositional trick, I think, and that is to use trees for framing. You can see over here we have trees on the left and trees on the right, and that got me the idea to use like this very standard trick to have the trees on the left point like toward this like central point, and on the right hand side as well. So they sort of create a frame inside of the picture that just keeps the entire thing together. This doesn't need to be trees. This can also be like houses or cliffs or whatever, but if you have like similar objects on the left hand side and on the right hand side of the scene that don't really like grab attention at all, you can use those to sort of frame your image. Tip number 11 is don't be lazy with your randomization. I especially noticed this like with this cornfield and with the fences. It's super easy to randomize these further if you just select them all, join them into a single object, and then just like go over them with the L key. Like now I just move my mouse and press the L key a couple of times. You can just assign different materials and then do the same thing again, maybe for a different color. So let's add some maybe bright spots in here. You can see like this is already a lot more interesting, and that was like 10 seconds or something. So like do the hard work, try to invest some time in manual or like semi-automated randomization, because it pays off so much. Your scene will look so much nicer if you just spend a couple more seconds on that. Tip number 12 is a very specific one, but generally what I do when I design cars is, first of all, like this geometry is weird, but that doesn't matter. One thing I generally try to do is I try to scale these windows inwards. You can just do that by, let me demonstrate that on this face, setting an inset using the I key and then extruding towards the inside. Pretty simple. And the other thing is that cars should have faces. In general, you can see this in my final scene. If you just add like 2 small eyes with these blinkers, like these orange ones, they make them look even more like eyes and maybe an antenna or something, your car will already look a lot more interesting and a lot more fun than before. Tip number 13 is to randomize your object colors. If you look in the original scene, all these trees have the exact same color. If you look into my scene, they have multiple colors. In general, I think it's better to do this by hand, but there's a very simple way to actually automate this that yields decent results. So what you can do is you can create one material, and wait, this is the world viewer. Let's go to object. Here you can see that I used just one color ramp and the standard shader and this object info node to actually randomize these colors, because if I duplicate this tree over and over again, there will sometimes be like this, this bright one or the bluish one. Yeah, you can see that over here. Some of these will appear. Let's delete them. But yeah, the way you do that is by using the object info node, then using the random input to pump it into a color ramp. The reason why I have this set up this way is that I didn't want to have too many mixed colors, which fall into these like small categories in between here. If I wanted a more gradual change, I could do this, and then I would have more variety, but like this I have only like 3 main types. And then just pump it into the base color and you will have object color randomization. And we are at tip number 14, which is color reference. I generally try to extend my palette because I was very limited for a very long time, and right now I'm trying to experiment with 4 colors, and the most easy way to do that is to find a good reference image and to try to copy the mood and colors from that image. So the final image for my shack that I made was inspired by this image from the Netflix show Hilda, which features a lot of these like same main colors. Like you can see the reds and these very toned down blues and the greens. It's pretty much the same color. Mine is still very much different because of the lighting, etc. But it was my main inspiration. So if you have some image that actually captures the mood that you want to have, try to duplicate those colors and try to work towards that, because that will help you understand colors better and to have something that looks nicer in the end. Another tip is tip number 15, and we're already in the lighting section. Let's look at the world setup that I used for this image. If we go to the world tab, you can see that I have two things here. I have I have like the standard background now, you know, that is always there. The strength of my background is dependent on whether this is a camera array or not. This way, like if I tweak this value, I can control how bright the world actually is. Let me demonstrate that. I hope that the recording still works. This changes how much environment light I have without changing the actual sky color. So if I make this black, there's no environment light on these mountains, but the sky is still the same color. And if I make it like rather bright, it's a little bit toned down. And then we have this section over here, which is the color that I created. So you can use a texture coordinate node, and then by manipulating the rotation of a gradient texture, you can pump it into a color ramp, and you can create this sort of horizon thing where there's one spot where the color is very yellowish and the rest is pretty much orange. Which just looks better. Like a small gradient in the sky always makes your scene look more interesting than having none at all. Let's take a very short look at the lights that I have in this scene. So in general, you already saw that we have environment light from the world that we have. And then the rest of my light setup is that I have one sun lamp, which comes from the left-hand side to make it more dramatic. If you don't know what side your sun lamp should be coming from, just place one in there and rotate it around the z-axis and just see how your scene looks. You will eventually find some spot where it looks cool, and then you can stick to that. My sun lamp is not really bright though, because I wanted to go for a very dramatic, sort of a little bit unrealistic lighting, to be fair. I added a lot of spotlights in this scene. So I have one spotlight that highlights my main shack here, which is just a simple spotlight with a lot of, you can increase this blend size to make it less obvious that it is a circle, etc. Increase the power a lot, because if you have watts enabled, it should be really strong to have an impact. And then I have one spotlight for the cornfield here. I have one spotlight for the guy back there. I have one spotlight that actually creates this soft yellowish light on the left-hand side, which is barely noticeable, but it gives sort of a balance to the sky on the top right. And then I have a very, very small spotlight highlighting these trees, but that is barely noticeable. But then again, there's another trick that I used to make the scene look good, because you can see that the foreground is rather dark, and also this area here doesn't get any sunlight. And the way I do that is I just put huge rectangles in the sky that block the sunlight. Seems stupid, but it works super well. And then I have also a very large plane over here that actually blocks all environment light coming from the sky from over here. So this is another light blocker that is not specific to the sun lamp, but to the environment light. And these in the combination help me to craft and create the shadows in spots where I want them to have. Because if you then look into the final scene, you can see that the light is really only on the shack and on the fisherman here, and in general on the points where I want it to be, and not on the spots where I want to draw the attention away from. And then one last tip, if you don't know what to do, just join my Discord, because that is also what I did with this image. After working on it, I just posted it there and asked all people what they thought of it, and there were still a lot of tips. For example, I added this grass in the front because the cornfields actually had really straight lines here in the beginning, and I reworked some of the shadows on the left hand side regarding, like, after I got some feedback on that. Gathering feedback is the #1 way to grow, and if you are afraid to do that, like, somewhere, just come and see the Discord or write to me personally or something, and I will try to see if I can help you out. If you have your own image that you want me to take a look at, send it to me through the comments or through an email or through the Discord. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you learned something. See you next time.